Welcome back. I'm Orla alongside Andrea. Now, what makes people go into a rage of anger and how can people manage their anger? Joining us now from Toronto is clinical psychologist Dr. Bhatia. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Bhatia.
Great to be on with you both.
So, why do some people suffer from anger issues and not others?
That's a really good question. I think the first place to start is, we all have anger, right? And anger is a normal emotion. And we sometimes construe anger as being just bad, right? And that we should all not have anger. And that has consequences because it leads to some people having an inability to actually manage problems with their anger in healthy ways because they're told to not be angry. So I just want your listeners to be aware that, anger is not all bad to start with, and anger is a healthy emotion. The problem becomes, and when we talk about this in psychotherapy and working with patients and people who struggle with anger, is when anger goes from being adaptive to maladaptive. So healthy anger is being assertive. We all benefit from being assertive. Assertive is being able to set limits, have boundaries, tell someone no. If you feel pressure to go somewhere, do you want to come out today? No, I'd rather stay home and relax. So healthy anger is setting limits, knowing your boundaries, being able to communicate no and in a healthy, confident manner. Unhealthy anger is when we become aggressive. When we lash out, we act out, we get impulsive, we have emotional escalations. And that's the anger we're talking about in this conversation that's not productive towards our own internal functioning, our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with other people, and it gets in the way of us doing things that are goal-directed in our life. So the question you asked about what makes some people angry and others not angry, there's all kinds of reasons for that, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. For some people, anger becomes a problem when they've had an inability to have a healthy relationship with that growing up. They've had difficulty in relationships that have led to them being angry. It could be a result of other conditions, for example, depression or anxiety. It can relate to your relationship with drug or alcohol use. So it's very individually based, but we know that what perpetuates anger problems is sometimes a lack of an acknowledgement of having anger and then the mechanisms we use to try to deal with it.
Dr. Bhatia, can tiredness cause anger issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the derivatives of that is tiredness could mean, am I taking care of my body? Am I taking care of my mind? Am I, taking on too many activities, right? So tiredness for me, we unpack that and say, okay, what is leading to someone being tired? And yes, if you're in a state of being tired, then you're at a place where you don't have the ability to regulate as much, right? Because sleep and tiredness are so important. So there's typically, you let your guard down, so to speak. And that guard is your ability to regulate your emotions, to think before you speak, to be connected to yourself, to be cognitively aware of where I'm at today. How am I feeling today? Am I nourishing my body and my mind? So when you're in a state of being tired, you're basically letting your guard down, which then makes you more susceptible to irritability, to lashing out, to saying something you probably wouldn't say if you had your sleep last night. Or if you waited 10 minutes, you might not have framed that response to a friend, a coworker, a boss, a partner in that manner. So absolutely, tiredness is a part of that, and it can lead to you feeling maybe pressure, feeling burnt out, feeling overwhelmed, and in that moment, you just don't have that bandwidth to kind of ground, center, and think before you speak.
Most of us, many of us do snap from time to time, right?
Yes, yes.
How do you know when, you've snapped with one situation or you're just having a reaction versus it's really a bigger anger management issue?
No, it's a really good question, and I think it's always important to frame it as, a one-time snapping or lashing out doesn't mean you need to be automatically into treatment with me, right? So I think, I think that's important for your listeners to know. I think it's the key word there is there's a repetitive nature of it, so it becomes it becomes more the norm than an outlier, and you start to pay attention to, okay, what is the consequence of my anger? So we talk about, looking at psychological difficulties. We're looking at what is the impact on my daily functioning. So if my anger is coming out more and more often, I'm having, my partner, my family, my kids commenting, hey, dad or partner, you're being a certain way. Can you be a little more, careful how you speak. You're seeing ruptures in your relationships. You're getting comments at work. You're seeing difficulties in friendships. You're noticing that, it's happening more often than not. Those are the signs, right? Like, how is this impacting on my day-to-day functioning? And it's a repetitive pattern of behaviors that negatively impacts on your situation or your relationships. So that's what I'm looking for. What we're looking for is this becoming more the norm than an outlier, which happens to all of us at times.
You're listening to Now Trending. I'm Orla alongside Andrea, and we are chatting with clinical psychologist Dr. Maneet Bhatia. Dr. Bhatia, how can people manage their anger?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So I think the first thing to acknowledge is, if you have anger, to say, I have anger. It sounds very simple and maybe like Captain Obvious, but it's not very simple for most people to just acknowledge that I have anger. That I'm a human being that has a range of emotions, and one of them is anger. So first and foremost, it's being able to acknowledge that I have anger. It's part of who I am. And instead of just dismissing it or denying it, accept that that's part of my being. And then with that framework, it's starting to do, there's many techniques that people can engage in, but the first one can be, if you're in a conversation, and this also is important to understand that you have more of awareness and a connection to your mind and body. So being present focus is important in these situations, which is very hard. But trying to be present with yourself, paying attention in a moment that you're feeling something, and say, listen, I'm starting to feel, I'm getting a little more, I'm noticing my voice is rising. I'm getting a little bit, I'm turning red. I'm getting a little bit of tension in my body. So this is probably a sign that I'm getting charged up. And it's in that moment to say, okay, I can acknowledge that I'm feeling angry. So, Maneet, I'm angry right now. I'll tell myself. And then you say, I'm going to take a 10-minute break here. I'm going to tell the person I'm speaking to or the situation I'm in, I'm going to disengage for 10 minutes. I'm going to go for a walk if I'm at a restaurant or something. I'll just go use the washroom for 10 minutes and come back or something. Or if I'm in a conversation with my partner, we'll both agree to have a timeout and say, listen, I'm not ducking this conversation. I hear you. I am getting angry right now. I'm getting a bit emotional. I need a break for 5 to 10 minutes. And the key thing I also said in that is, in the timeout or the break, I use the words I. Take ownership of your feelings. So rather than saying, you're making me feel this way, or you always make me feel this way, or you do this to me, whatever version of that you statement, reframe it. I'm feeling angry right now about this situation. I am angry about how you made that comment or did that particular behavior. So I need to, acknowledge that feeling. When you shift from a you to an I, you take ownership, you acknowledge your emotion, and also you help diffuse the situation you're in because you're not blaming somebody else. So those are three key things there I would say to start off with is acknowledge that I have the feeling to myself, self-talk. Pay attention to how it feels in your body. Those are connected together. Take 10 minutes to step out of a situation when you notice that emotion's coming up, the anger is rising in the situation. I'm going to take a time out. And in communicating that anger and that limit or that feeling, use I statements versus you statements. If you try those can be three of many different ways to tackle anger in day-to-day situations.
Dr. Bhatia, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who's had a really good time during the pandemic. Are you seeing more people who have developed anger management issues since the onset of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's been definitely a rise. That people are frustrated, they're angry, and it becomes absolutely connected to what's going on in the world. Because sometimes anger is a response to feeling like helpless, or feeling, you don't have control. So, we're living in a world where we're at the mercy of a virus, right? And then, subsequent policies around that. And currently we're living in a time where there's all kinds of protests going around in Canada, right? And part of that protest, no matter what your position on the matter is there's an anger, right? A frustration. So we live in an environment that is perpetuating that for people, whether it's, a sense of loss of job security or relational challenges or not being able to see each other. And all of these things combine together to make us not feel, quote unquote normal. And that our routines and our lives are continuously disrupted. We get into a rhythm. It's pulled out. We have to reinvest in how we see the world and renegotiate the world we're in. And this constant yo-yo effect, it becomes very disruptive. And sometimes the way we channel that is in anger, and we need to, and that can come out in even psychologically. And this is a bit of a tangent, but I'll get back to topic, is we need someone to be angry at, right? Because it helps us feel better about ourselves. And that's why we typically, get involved in causes or particular events, because we want to let that anger out in some productive way, right? So I think absolutely, long answer to your question, but anger is clearly more evident in our practice. And it shows itself in varying ways, whether it's work, relationships, or our society in whole right now.
Dr. Bhatia, always a pleasure chatting with you. Incredibly insightful today. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
That's clinical psychologist Dr. Maneet Bhatia. His clinic is in Toronto, and you can follow him at Bhatia Psychology. His second name spelled Bhatia. Coming up, fashion producer Hans Koschling is just back from New York Fashion Week. He has the latest trends for spring. But first, let's take